One proxy to understand if your VC firm is successful or not is how many funds they have run. And typically, when you see a VC fund that runs just one fund, is quite a signal that or is really, really young, is new in the game, and so we need time to deploy, because keep in mind it takes from 5 to 8 years to complete the funding and the investment process and the exit process. But when you see somebody is around since a while and is still with the first fund, it means probably has not completed his job and not found a track record of investment and returns that are making him interesting for raising a new fund. So the first question for Philipp is how many funds Robert Bosch Venture Capital has run?
Since the beginning of the year, we are fortunate to invest our fourth fund.
So it's number 4. So that means that you have a track record of at least 3 other funds with, I assume, there will be positive returns that encourage the LPs to invest more and to ask you to continue your job.
The one LP.
Yeah, one LP.
At least so far. So it's all Bosch money. Bosch is the only single LP. But at least we could convince Bosch regularly not only to set up our funds, it's virtual funds. So we do the investments off balance sheet, but for performance and other topics, we look at it as if it was a fund. And not only were we able to get them approved every 3-4 years, but also increased. The first one was 120 million. The second and third were 150 each, and now the fourth fund is 200.
So 120, 150, 200. This is the size of your funds, which, again, one big topic in Europe is not just talking about CVC, but talking generally about VCs, is that the size of the fund in Europe are pretty small. So I think that the average of a VC fund in Europe is about from 50 to 65, 75 million on average. Talking about a CVC, which is the size, the minimum size that allows to do operation, in your opinion?
Well, it depends on what you target. If you're a local investor in one single European country or maybe the EU, let's say, then it's a different story. Then for us, we have offices in the Valley, in Israel, in China, as well as here in Europe. So I think it's more the number of deals per year that you are able to do with this fund that is relevant, because what you need is visibility in the market. And if you do only 1 or 2 deals a year, that in my eyes is too few. But if you do, I don't know, between 5 and 8 deals regularly over year by year, then you have the visibility so that people approach you and that you are taken seriously as an investor. And therefore, if you do that only in one country, then of course the fund doesn't need to be as big as if you want to do it in global regions.
And which is the typical ticket size?
For us,
and which is your focus? Your focus is early stage, later stage?
Actually, we are pretty broad in that sense. Our sweet spot, I would say, is Series A. Mm-hmm. So we do look at early stage companies predominantly. Mm-hmm. We actually even do from time to time, but seldom do seed deals. But we also sometimes do later stage deals. So Series B or C, we don't exclude. And ticket sizes therefore also depend a little bit. Usually it's first time investment is between 3 and 5 million, sometimes a bit more. If it's a seed deal, we limit it at 500,000 max. And then more or less the same in follow-on rounds. We are set up as if it was a fund, and also that the board of management of Bosch approves the entire fund and not only a yearly budget, because then we can show in the market, listen, we are a reliable investor. We have the money already put aside, if you want, so we can do follow-on rounds together with the co-investors. So that's a big plus in the market when it comes to can we rely on that you fund us also in 3 years when the next, or 2 years when the next financing round is coming around.
So that is very important because from my personal experience as former startup raising capital, it's difficult to rate the VCs and to rate their ability to follow you up along your pathway. Because most of the time you take the money that you find. Yeah. But when you have the opportunity of choosing, there are some parameters to select a good investors versus the others. Going back to Bosch and Robert Bosch Venture Capital, Bosch decided to have his own CVC arm. It's been you already say that the only LP is Bosch. So it's a closed fund, meaning it's just serving the captive market. But which is your main? Which are your goals? Financial, strategic, both. Which is your KPIs as an investor?
So it's predominantly strategic, but I must it's a big but, not in terms of the investments we do. So the strategic part is kind of besides our investments that we do, because what we target or aim for is to bring startups together with Bosch business units so that they can elaborate whether or not there is a way to collaborate. And this is our key task. This is why we actually exist. So, and we have a deal flow of more than 2,000 startups a year, which we screen very thoroughly. And then we have, I don't know, more than 100 where we really say, oh yeah, this is so relevant for Bosch. We need to do an introduction to the business operations guys and say, listen, you should talk. And we go even beyond that we say, okay, not only a first meeting arranged, but we since 2 years now, we drive this open innovation topic with a small team of 3 people that do nothing else but bringing the two sides together again and again, agreeing on timetables, agreeing on next steps, who's doing what, always with the aim to agree on a POC, proof of concept project. And we are measured by exactly that. So on an annual basis, we have KPIs. How many POCs have we enabled? What's the feedback of the business units about the relevance of those startups for their innovation topics, of the trends that we see? To some extent, there is then the investment coming in because we also test how relevant are our portfolio companies for certain Bosch entities, and do they find a way to cooperate or not? And then lastly, it's just the number of deals that we do a year to make sure that we do indeed what I mentioned earlier, do sufficient enough deals so that we continue to be visible in the market.
So just going back to your figures, 2,000 startup screened per year, 100 that are, let's say, filtered and considered relevant and introduced to the business units. Do you invest after the POC is signed? Not necessarily, you might be independent.
The investment side is fortunately completely independent. So it's a decision only by us, RBVC, whether or not we invest. We are currently 7 investment partners, and it's an N-1 decision. If at least 6 partners say, yeah, this there we invest, then we invest. We don't need a buy-in of a business unit. We don't have an investment committee from the Bosch board. So this is purely internally, fortunately.
So you don't need a business validation to invest?
We better do. Yeah. Because if it goes wrong, you better show that you have done the homework nevertheless.
So, but what you're saying is that out of the 100, how many POC on average Bosch initiate per year, just to have some metrics?
Roughly. As it's only a very recent initiative, as I said, the aim is for next year to have at least 15 POCs concluded with a clear result. What was the outcome, and will they continue to work together or not?
And you typically, out of the 100, how many invest per year?
Between 5 and 10.
Okay. That's not necessarily the 15 that we're talking about. Cool. So that's interesting. By the way, this is quite in line with what other corporates are doing. I think that the fact that you started an open innovation unit inside Bosch, I think you touched a point that we think is critical for many corporates. That is the interaction with the business units. Because, business units by definition are driven not from the long-term view, but they're driven for the quarterly financials. Yeah. And so buying their time just to consider future development options, develop a pilot requires dedicated attention. How many companies do you have in your portfolio currently? Including the 4 funds?
Yeah, currently it's around about 55.
55. Yeah. Any big exits out of them?
Probably the biggest media attention got Movidius. That was 3 years ago. Movidius was also a chip company, which we sold we together with the co-investors to Intel back then for a couple of $100 million. That got quite some media attention, but also things like Torqeedo. They were in Munich, a company developing electric motors for boats. So overall, I think we had by now more than 15 exits.
15 out of 55. Yes. Considering the different age of the portfolio. Yes.
And none of them to Bosch, actually.
That was my next question, actually.
Yeah. So that is kind of an indication how independent our investment side is from the Bosch strategic side. We had a couple of instances where Bosch looked at it and even some where they at least submitted an indicative offer. But at the end of the day, none of them were actually acquired by Bosch. But on the exits again, none were actually acquired by Bosch. But having said that, we had a couple of instances where we introduced companies to Bosch as relevant new technologies or innovations. And at least 3 or 4 were outright taken over completely by Bosch. So
without your investment?
Without our investment, yeah.
So to wrap it up, what I've learned today, at least I put in, is number one, the CVC is quite independent from the parent company. You have your own...
In our case.
Exactly, because one thing that we have is...
When I joined RBVC 5.5 years ago from within Bosch, and when I talked to other CVCs, I was amazed about the variety of business models of corporate venture capital. You find everything from very independent, almost like a family office, to very strategic. Take, say, Siemens. They need to get the buy-in and the agreement of a business entity, plus part of the money from the business entity so that they can invest. It's very on the strategic closed side. So therefore, this is our model that we've chosen, but the other models are also out there, and they certainly have good reasons for their choice.
No, there are other kind of VCs. They do invest only if there is a commercial successful deployment. And in this way, the strategic goal is pretty linked. But talking about Robert Bosch Venture Capital and Bosch approach, if I got it right, correct me if I'm not, is that you're quite independent in selecting your strategy. You are working to provide, and this is the more recent development, a deal flow to your business units, and to manage the deal flow of the business unit, you have also introduced a dedicated open innovation unit inside Bosch that can help to channel the deal flow to the business unit and work with them to make some of them potentially move forward. While the Robert Bosch Venture Capital typically is independent. You make your own investment decision without any pre-approval or let's say, precondition from the parent company, and not necessarily your investment if there is any POC, pilot, or successful deployment. That is quite interesting. For funds raised, growing amounts year over year.
And we have a new project in China, because even with 200 million, we realized if we take even a quarter of that to China, it's still tiny.
Yes.
And we were actually
compared to SoftBank,
and we were actually approached by Chinese parties, both from the state as well as institutional. They said, "Well, why don't you join forces with others? Why don't you set up a fund where others can contribute?" And that's what we are currently planning. I don't know whether it will work, but at least we found a partner, an institutional Chinese fund. Together with them, we'll now set up the structure and we'll start fundraising kind of as we speak, and see if we can raise a larger fund for China only, where we only have a small portion.
So it will be the first time that you launch a fund when the LP is not only Bosch.
Correct.
That's interesting. Final question, and I'll let you go, is what you've done before the CVC experience, because you just mentioned and I was curious.
So I've done a couple of jobs within Bosch before. I started my career in M&A, investment banking, but then didn't want to continue being the advisor, rather wanted to sit on the other side of the table. Did a few years M&A internally, and then were CFO type roles in sister companies, daughter companies of Bosch, both abroad in Melbourne, Australia, as well as here in Germany.
Cool. So, thank you. Big round of applause for...
Pleasure.